All right, chapters 11 and 12. This chapter is the Christmas horses. Grasshopper weather was strange weather. Even at Thanksgiving, there was no snow. The door of the dugout was wide open while they ate Thanksgiving dinner. Laura could see across the bare willow tops far over the prairie to the place where the sun would go down. There was not one speck of snow. The prairie was like soft yellow fire. The line where it met the sky was not sharp now. It was smudged and blurry. Grasshopper weather, Laura thought to herself. She thought of grasshoppers' long folded wings and their high jointed hind legs. Their feet were thin and scratchy. Their heads were hard, with large eyes on the corners, and their jaws were tiny and nibbling. If you caught a grasshopper and held them, and gently poked a green blade of grass into its jaws, they nibbled fast. They swiftly nibbled in the whole grass blade till the tip of it went in them and was gone. Thanksgiving dinner was good. Pa had shot a wild goose for it. Ma had to stew the goose because there was no fireplace and no oven in the little stove. But she made dumplings in the gravy, and there were corn dodgers and mashed potatoes. There were butter and milk and stewed dried plums, and 3 grains of parched corn lay beside each tin plate. At the first Thanksgiving dinner, the poor pilgrims had nothing to eat but 3 parched grains of corn. Then the Indians came and brought them turkeys, so the pilgrims were thankful. Now they had eaten their good food. Now they had eaten their good big Thanksgiving dinner. Laura and Mary could eat their grains of corn and remember the pilgrims. Parched corn was good. It crackled and crunched, and it tasted sweet and brown. Then Thanksgiving was past, and it was time to think of Christmas. Still there was no snow and no rain. The sky was gray. The prairie was dull, and the winds were cold. But the cold winds blew over the top of the dugout. A dugout is snug and cozy, said Ma, but I do feel like an animal pinned up for the winter. Never mind, Caroline, Pa said. We'll have a good house next year. His eyes shone, and his voice was like singing. And good horses and a buggy to boot. I'll take you riding, dressed up in silks. Think, Caroline, this level, rich land with not a stone or stump to contend with, and only 3 miles from a railroad. We can sell every grain of wheat we raise. Then he ran his fingers through his hair and said, I do wish I had a team of horses. Now, Charles, Ma said, here we are, all healthy and safe and snug, with food for the winter. Let's be thankful for what we do have. I am, Pa said, but Pete and Bright are too slow for harrowing and harvesting. I've broken up that big field with them, but I can't put in all the wheat without horses. Then Laura had a chance to speak without interrupting. She said, There isn't any fireplace. Whatever are you talking about? Ma asked. Santa Claus, Laura answered. Eat your supper, Laura, and let's not cross bridges till we come to them, said Ma. Laura and Mary knew that Santa Claus could not come down a chimney where there was no chimney to come down. One day, Mary asked Ma how Santa Claus would come. Ma did not answer. Instead, she said, What do you girls want for Christmas? She was ironing. One end of the ironing board was on the table, and the other was on the bedstead. Pa had made the bedstead that high on purpose. Carrie was playing on the bed, and Laura and Mary sat by the window. Mary was sorting quilt blocks, and Laura was making a little apron for the rag doll Charlotte. The wind howled overhead and whined in the stovepipe. There was no snow yet. Laura said, I want candy. So do I, said Mary. And Carrie cried, Candy? And a new winter dress? And a coat and a hood, said Mary. So do I, said Laura. And a dress for Charlotte, and Ma lifted the iron from the stove and held it out to them. They could test the iron. They licked their fingers and touched them quicker than quick to the smooth bottom. If it crackled, then the iron was hot enough. Thank you, Mary and Laura, Ma said. She began carefully ironing around and over the patches of Pa's shirt. Do you know what Pa wants for Christmas? They did not answer. Horses, said Ma. Would you girls like horses? Laura and Mary looked at each other. I only thought, Ma went on, if we all wished for horses, and nothing but horses, then maybe. Laura felt queer. Horses were every day. They were not Christmas. If Pa got horses, he would trade for them. Laura could not think of Santa Claus and horses at the same time. Ma, she cried, there is a Santa Claus, isn't there? Of course there's a Santa Claus, said Ma. She set the iron on the stove to heat again. The older you are, the more you know about Santa Claus, she said. You're so big now. You know he can't just be one man, don't you? You know he's everywhere on Christmas Eve. He's in the big woods and in Indian Territory and far away in New York State and here. He comes down all the chimneys all at the same time. You know that, don't you? Yes, Ma, said Mary and Laura. Well, said Ma, then you see, I guess he is like the angels, Mary said slowly, and Laura could see that just as well as Mary could. Then Ma told them something else about Santa Claus. He was everywhere, and besides that, he was all the time. Whenever anyone was unselfish, that was Santa Claus. Christmas Eve was the time when everybody was unselfish. On that one night, Santa Claus was everywhere, besides everybody, all together. Stop being selfish and wanting other people to be happy. And in the morning, you saw what they had done. If everybody wanted everybody else to be happy all the time, then it would be Christmas all the time? Laura asked. And Ma said, Yes, Laura. Laura thought about that, and so did Mary. They thought, and they looked at each other, and they knew what Ma wanted them to do. She wanted them to wish for nothing but horses for Pa. They looked at each other again, and they looked away quickly, and they did not say anything. Even Mary, who was always so good, did not say a word. That night after supper, Pa drew Laura and Mary close to him, into the crook of his arms. Laura looked up at his face, and then she snuggled against him. She said, Pa, what is it, my little half-pint of sweet cider? Pa asked. And Laura said, Pa, I want Santa Claus to bring... What, Laura? Pa asked. Horses, said Laura. If you will let me ride them sometimes. So do I, said Mary. But Laura had said it first. Pa was surprised. His eyes shone soft and bright at them. Would you girls really like horses? He asked them. Oh, yes, Pa, they said. In that case, Pa said, smiling, I have an idea that Santa Claus will bring us all a fine team of horses. That settled it. They would not have any Christmas, only horses. Laura and Mary soberly undressed and soberly buttoned themselves into their nightgowns and tied their nightcap strings. Then they knelt down together and said, Now I lay me down to sleep. I pray the Lord my soul to keep. If I should die before I wake, I pray the Lord my soul to take. And please bless Pa and Ma and Carrie and everybody, and make me a good girl forever and ever. Amen. Quickly Laura added in her own head, "And please make me only glad about the Christmas horses, forever and ever, amen." She climbed into bed, and almost right away she was glad. She thought of horses, sleek and shining, of how their manes and tails blew in the wind, how they picked up their swift feet and sniffed the air with velvety noses, and looked at everything with bright, soft eyes, and Pa would let them ride them. Pa had tuned his fiddle, and now he set it against his shoulder. Overhead the wind went wailing lonely in the dark cold, but in the dugout everything was snug and cozy. Bits of firelight came through the seams of the stove and twinkled on Ma's steel knitting needles and tried to catch Pa's elbow. In the shadows the bow was dancing. On the floor Pa's toe was tapping, and the merry music hid the lonely crying of the wind. The next chapter's A Merry Christmas. Next morning, snow was in the air. Hard bits of snow were leaping and whirling in the howling wind. Laura could not go out to play. In the stable, Spot and Pete and Bright stood all day long, eating the hay and straw. In the dugout, Pa mended his boots, while Ma read to him again the story called Milk Bank. Mary sewed, and Laura played with Charlotte. She could let Carrie hold Charlotte, but Carrie was too little to play with the paper dolls. She might tear them. That afternoon, when Carrie was asleep, Ma beckoned her and Laura. Her face was shining with a secret. They put their heads together, and she told them they could make a button string for Carrie's Christmas. They climbed onto their bed and turned their backs to Carrie and spread their laps wide, and Ma brought them her button box. The box was almost full. Ma had saved buttons since she was smaller than Laura, and she had buttons from her mother that they had saved when her mother was a little girl. There were blue buttons and red buttons, silvery and goldy buttons, curved buttons, tiny raised castle and bridges with trees on them. There were twinkling jet buttons, painted china buttons, striped buttons, buttons like juicy blackberries, even one with a tiny dog head. Laura squealed when she saw it. Shh, Ma shushed her, but Carrie did not wake up. Ma gave them all these buttons to make a button string for Carrie. After that, Laura did not mind staying in the dugout. When she saw the outdoors, the wind was driving snowdrifts across the bare, frozen land. The creek was ice, and the willow tops rattled. In the dugout, she and Mary had their secret. They played gently with Carrie and gave her everything that she wanted. They cuddled her and sang to her and got her to sleep whenever they could, and then they worked on the button string. Mary had one end of the string, and Laura had the other. They picked out buttons that they wanted and strung them onto the string. They held the string out and looked at it and took off some buttons and put on others. Sometimes they took off every button and started all over again. They were going to make the most beautiful button string in the world. One day Ma told them that this was the day before Christmas. They must finish the button string that day. They could not get Carrie to sleep. She ran and shouted, climbed on benches and jumped off. She skipped and sang. She did not get tired. Mary told her to sit still like a little lady, but she wouldn't. Laura let her hold Charlotte. She jounced Charlotte up and down and flung her against the wall. Finally, Ma cuddled her and sang. Laura and Mary sat perfectly still. Lower and lower. Carrie's eyes blinked till they shut. When softly Ma stopped singing, Carrie's eyes popped open and she shouted, "More, Ma, more!" But at last she fell asleep, and then quickly Laura and Mary finished the button string. Ma tied the ends together for them, and it was done. They could not change one button more. It was a beautiful button string. That evening after supper, when Carrie was sound asleep, Ma hung her clean little pair of stockings from the table edge. Laura and Mary, in their nightgowns, slid the button string into one stocking. That was all. Mary and Laura were going to bed when Pa asked them, "Aren't you girls going to hang up your stockings?" "But I thought," Laura said, "I thought Santa Claus was going to bring us horses." "Maybe he will," Pa said. "But little girls always hang up their stockings on Christmas Eve, don't they?" Laura did not know what to think. Neither did Mary. Ma took 2 clean stockings out of the clothes box, and Pa helped hang them beside Carrie's. Laura and Mary said their prayers and went to sleep, wondering. In the morning, Laura heard the fire crackling. She opened one eye the least bit and saw lamplight and a bulge in her Christmas stocking. She yelled and jumped out of bed. Mary came running too, and Carrie woke up. In Laura's stocking and in Mary's stocking, there were little paper packages just alike. In the packages was candy. Laura had 6 pieces, and Mary had 6. They had never seen such beautiful candy. It was too beautiful to eat. Some pieces were like ribbons, bent in waves. Some were short bits of round stick candy, and on their flat ends were colored flowers that went all the way through. Some were perfectly round and striped. In one of Carrie's stockings, in one of Carrie's stockings were 4 pieces of that beautiful candy. In the other was the button string. Carrie's eyes and her mouth were perfectly round when she saw it. Then she squealed and grabbed it and squealed again. She sat on Pa's knee looking at her candy and her button string and her wriggling and laughing with joy. Then it was time for Pa to do the chores. He said, "Do you suppose that there's anything for us in the stable?" And Ma said, "Dress as fast as you can, girls, and you can go to the stable and see what Pa finds." It was winter, so they had to put on their stockings and shoes. But Ma helped them button up their shoes, and she pinned their shawls under their chins. Then they ran out into the cold. Everything was gray, except a long red streak in the eastern sky. Its red light shone on the patches of gray-white snow. Snow was caught in the dead grass on the walls and roof of the stable, and it was red. Pa stood waiting in the stable door. He laughed when he saw Laura and Mary, and he stepped outside to let them go in. There, standing in Pete and Bright's places, were 2 horses. They were larger than Pet and Patty. They were soft red-brown color, shining like silk. Their manes and tails were black. Their eyes were bright and gentle. They put their velvety noses down to Laura and nibbled softly at her hand and breathed warm on them. "Well, Flutterbudget," said Pa, "and Mary, how do you girls like your Christmas?" "Very much, Pa," said Mary. But Laura could only say, "Oh, Pa." Pa's eyes shone deep, and he said, "Who wants to ride the Christmas horses to water?" Laura could hardly wait while he lifted Mary up and showed her how to hold on to the horse's mane. Then he told her not to be afraid. Then Pa's strong hands swung Laura up. She sat on the horse's big, gentle back and felt its aliveness carrying her. All outdoors was glittering now with sunshine on snow and frost. Pa went ahead, leading the horses, and carrying his axe to break the ice in the creek so they could drink. The horses lifted their heads and took deep breaths and whooshed the cold out of their noses. Their velvety ears pricked forward and then back and then forward again. Laura held onto her horse's mane and clapped her shoes together and laughed. Pa and the horses and Mary and Laura were all happy in the gay, cold Christmas morning.